In Deadly Company, um, I knew that I had written about some pretty heavy stories previous to this. I wanted something a little bit lighter. So I thought the idea, and something that was truly reflective of the times, the idea of burnout, workplace dynamics, back to office orders, people have a very distinct view of the workplace right now, and not all of it is very flattering. So, in Deadly Company, it's told from the perspective of an executive assistant. I knew I wanted to do it in her voice, where she's basically observing all these crazy things that are happening. She has this like one percenter maniacal boss that she keeps having to clean up after. And one of the things that she is tasked with is his big blowout birthday bash, in which he and several others are murdered. So it's the foibles and all the things that are going on behind the scenes to explain how exactly this happened. And I knew I could have kept the story just to that, but I also wanted to add again, I prefer stories with an emotional dynamic, not just the covering of the plot itself. I wanted to tell the perspective of her in the present after all this has happened. How does she feel about all of this? And so she's now battling the idea that a lot of people think that she's guilty. And so she wants to basically plead her case. And she thinks the best way to do that is to agree to get a movie made. And so it's a dual timeline where it's told in the present, where this movie is getting made, and she feels like her messaging is getting thwarted at all turns because we know that Hollywood movies are not a straightforward, simple thing. And we're also seeing what happened in the past and whether or not what the message that Nicole once conveyed to the public is really the truth. And the truth is somewhere in between. Some of my favorite characters, definitely Xander, because he is just a big adult baby. So you could go completely full out with him. He has literal temper tantrums. He's completely self-indulgent. He has a drug habit. And so he says things that other characters wouldn't think to say. And I always love to do those characters. You get to engage your id when you write those type of characters. Another character I really enjoyed was her mother. Her She has kind of a fraught relationship with her mother. They love each other, but they get on each other's nerves. And so there's her mother is also her sounding board. So her mother will come in and tell her like that doesn't sound right, or are you sure you want to do that? And finally, another fun character was Jeremiah. He is a kind of a playboy boy toy that has a relationship with Nicole that people can read and see what that relationship is. And he's a snarky, straightforward guy that's was fun to write. Well, for me, dialogue, I do it as I'm writing but I think the rhythm of the story is largely dependent on it, and even defining the characters. I, some people tell me that a lot of my books can seem kind of cinematic, and I think part of that is that you try to write dialogue that echoes real conversations. And even if you're trying to embed like different things about the plot, it's like that's an important detail you probably need to know later. If if that's not working as I'm writing the story, then sometimes I'll say like, okay, well, this conversation isn't going to happen between these two characters. It's going to happen between these two characters because it doesn't make sense to write it this way. Um, but yeah, I think it's important to the rhythm of the story, the pacing of the story, and it's important to character development. It's how you craft the characters so that they're real people to the readers. So for me, God bless those who could plot and add the dialogue later. I don't think I could do it. Dialogue for me has never helped me craft the ending, but it's definitely helped me try to explain things. And I've had an editor say, don't over explain, don't monologue, find a way to like pull the threads together in this conversation without feeling like someone's turning to the camera and is like, do you see what's happening right now? So to me, that's always like like I said, trying to keep it natural, trying to keep it so that it fits into the flow of the story and it doesn't feel like you're bludgeoning the reader over the head with it. That it's like, no, this completely makes sense within the context of the story. And that's always the challenge. This one, I will be honest, when I originally started writing the book, I wrote it as an adult. But you know, when a story is telling you, I'm not meant to be this, and you keep trying to craft it and make it into that, and it's not working. I at first had the story told from the perspective of an adult woman who's looking back on what happened. And it to me, I was like, but most of the action is happening in the past. Why do we keep looking backward? Why don't you just tell it from the perspective of her as a teenager? And actually, I found that quite terrifying, because I had tried in the past to do a YA, and I was told, like, I don't know if you really have the voice for that. So, and I was like, okay, well, maybe I am just meant to write adult stories. But this character kept saying, like, no, I need to be from the perspective of a 16-year-old girl. So from there, I'm like, okay, I'll try it. And for me, it was this tug and pull because I'm a mom of a preteen. And but I also have an editor who's kind of like, teenagers do stuff, they have sex, they like, you got to talk about it. And so I was trying to balance out, i don't I don't want to be gross and sexualize 16-year-olds, but I also want to be authentic to what the characters are. And so trying to balance out the what I would normally do if I was telling an adult story versus telling a teen story, trying to not to diminish who they are just for my adult mom sensibilities, but also not over sexualizing them or just doing it for titillation. And for me, it was a delicate balance. It was even some pushing back and forth during the editorial process. I even consulted my preteen, and it was like, do you guys really do that? Do you guys really say that now? It's like, because even though like sexual behaviors and all that stuff for people who are millennials is very different for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, their points of view. And so I'm like, you have all these millennial authors who are, to me, kind of foisting their points of view of what a teenager is on people who are actually teens. So to me, it was important just to plug in with her and say, like, well, is this normal? Do you guys talk about this type of stuff? Would this be something that a couple would be expected to do right now? Or, and actually her feedback and her point of view was very different than sometimes what my editor was saying. And so I had to balance that in the story in order to make it as true, at least from my view, as I could. I grew up in the DC area, but every now and then you would have to go out in those parts. And it's like a completely different world, a completely different time. And there's something fascinating and, from my perspective, a little bit scary about it, because I never knew, as a Black woman traveling in those places, how you're going to be received. Is everybody going to be nice? Is everybody going to be welcoming? Are you going to be treated like the stranger? So having this character where her family is like, hey, let's just try this and see what we're going to do out there. And then, like, and one way they're like, okay, everybody seems nice, everybody seems cool, see, your fields weren't necessary. But then as she starts to dig into the history of this town and all these little things that she's seeing, like the gazebo with the bell, what is that bell for? Or the plaque that she sees in town of the mayor, that he said he protected its borders, and she's like, protected its borders from what? And she's learning more and more about this underbelly of this town that isn't common knowledge anymore, and but definitely has an impact on the present. And I thought that was important because it's applicable to many things, actually, when the past is kind of brushed over and said, okay, we're not doing that anymore. We moved on, but you don't acknowledge what really happened back then. And so Naomi is encountering that, and she's encountering that in her research, and she also encounters it in the present.